Okay, so we're going to talk about dimensions today, and much like text, we're going to talk about dimensions, and we're also going to talk about dimension styles, right? So last time we were here, we talked about text and text styles, all right? The topics are similar, although we will be using will be slightly different. The module is not totally complete yet, so I'll finish completing this today after our lecture here. But I will be using our booklet here for the lecture. So this will be posted for you, and this is creating annotative dimension styles. And so today we're going to talk about annotative dimensions and dimension styles, and then on Wednesday we're going to talk about how to use leaders, annotative dimensions, and annotative text all together, okay? And then our next topic will be blocks, all right? But here is all of the text for what we're going to be discussing today. So if you forget a setting or something, it's all laid out here, okay? And I think the text is pretty important for this topic because dimensions aren't, maybe I say this a lot, but dimensions aren't that difficult to use or to create, but there are a lot of settings. And if you get one of the settings incorrect, then it can just throw everything off, okay? Sounds pretty dramatic, but it's really true. It's tripped me up more than once, okay? So if you look at the course manual, right, you will see step by step, hey, here's how we create an annotative dimension style. Here is the box that we check, which if we forget, things don't work, okay? Here are all of the different settings that we are going to be using, right? So again, the booklet is kind of just a really good resource for you to go back to after the lecture, although we do have the video now, which is pretty nice as well, okay? Okay, so let's talk about creating, I'm going to start out with the dimension style, all right? And in doing that, I'm going to have to first create a text style because there's text that is built into a dimension style, and so one kind of relies on the other, okay? Although before we even get into that topic, I just want to describe a little about dimensions, okay? And on Wednesday, we're going to go over methodology a little bit, so how we actually use dimensions, text, and leaders, so applying them to objects in AutoCAD. Dimensions on a floor plan. Let's see if we can get a good image of a drawing, okay? Okay, here's kind of a good example right here. Hopefully I can pull this up on the screen. Although the dimensions don't make sense, of course, that always happens. But so these dimensions don't make a whole lot of sense other than they have an increment here. But dimensions are really used to quantify things on a drawing, okay? And I was very tempted to say floor plan because that's really sort of what we had on our screen here, okay? But really dimensions are used on almost all architectural drawings. Let's see if we can get a better one. There's a better one, okay. So here's a good example of just a small little floor plan, right? And for the builder to be able to accurately build the design that has been created by the designer or architect, you need dimensions on a set of drawings, okay? So you'll see here that we have dimensions between architectural elements, right? So it's 13'9" from the outside of this wall or all the way over to this dashed line right here. So it looks like the center line of that window. Okay, and then we have 2'9" between the center line of this window and the center line of that window, and then we have 10'6" to the center line of that window, 2'9" again to the center line, and then 5'3" to the end of the wall. All right. In addition to kind of this first string of dimensions, we have another dimension above that, right? That has a baseline spacing between the two. And this dimension right here shows the overall length of the entire floor plan, okay? So different strings of dimensions show different things. Like this first string will show interior elements at the exterior wall, okay? Or openings or change in plane. And this, the second or third string of dimension will show kind of overall dimension of the project, okay? You'll see interior dimensions, so from the outside of that wall to the center line of this wall, from the center line of this wall to the center line of that wall, okay? The trick behind dimensions, which I won't get into a whole lot today, but the trick behind dimensions is to put as few dimensions as possible on a set of drawings so that the drawing is readable, but to have just enough that everything can be built, right, and be quantified / measured, okay? But essentially this is what dimensions are used for and why they're helpful in an architectural drawing, okay? I would assume, and I hope that everybody's pretty used to the idea or knows what a dimension is. Okay, I really wish I had a little, oh, you know what? We have a floor plan. There it is. Lovely. Okay, so I have a floor plan here. This is even better. Although my dimensions here, which I'm going to delete, these are not really correct dimensions, meaning they're not, the dimension tool wasn't used to create them. Okay, so I'm going to show you today how to use the actual dimension tool to create dimensions. So, all right, I'm going to delete that, and we're just going to have a floor plan on our screen here. Now, it's not layered, which is a no-no, right? But I'm not going to take the time to do that. I'm just going to proceed forward with what we need to talk about today. Okay, so as a little bit of a review, I'm going to create a text style, and I'm going to make it annotative. And on Wednesday, this whole idea of creating things annotative will make a lot more sense. It'll all come together. But the first thing I'm going to do is create an annotative text style, okay? And the reason I'm going to do that is because I need an annotative text style to then embed into my dimension style, okay? So I'm going to come over here to the Annotate tab up here, and I'm going to use this little flyout right here, and my text style dialog box is going to pop up here, okay? And it looks like I have a couple of different text styles already created, and the standard has been redefined to be something else, but I'm going to click on New, and let's do a city blueprint style. I'm going to hit OK, and I'm going to change my font to City Blueprint. Regular annotative, check it yes, and I'm going to leave this unchecked for now. And I want my text height here to be 3/32 of an inch, okay? And no, I'm going to hit apply. I'm going to click on my new annotative style. And I know it's annotative because I get this little symbol right here. Does anybody know what that little symbol is? What is that? Does anybody know what that looks like? You got, yeah, you're right. It's the end of a scale, right? A scale ruler. We have to show everybody. I think you might have been one of the first people to recognize that, funny enough. You have a there you go, right? See the end of the scale rule right there? There's your annotative symbol right there. Okay, and it makes sense because this is a scale rule that allows you to measure different scales or draw different scales, you know, in a set of architectural drawings. So the annotative process is kind of the same in AutoCAD. Little trivia there. All right, so I clicked on City Blueprint, I hit Set Current, and I close that out. Okay, so now you'll see up here I have my City Blueprint text. Looks great, right? I'm not going to change any of my annotative settings, which occur down here. I think I briefly mentioned this last time. I do really kind of want this to say 1:1 just for today, okay? So if it doesn't, I would just click here and change this to 1:1. That's kind of the default that we have there, okay? All right, so let's talk now about creating dimensions. Without getting too much into, we'll say theory, the theory behind dimensions, let's talk about how to create a dimension style and then how to apply dimensions to objects in AutoCAD, okay? So dimensions, under the Annotate tab here, dimensions are kind of the little tool palette over from to the left of our text right here, tool palette, okay? They're another form of annotation, and they describe drawings in terms of giving them actual numeric definition, right? So the dimension of things. So they tell us the project's size, essentially, okay? And they tell us the dimension size, or the project size in real world definition. So if a project is 400 feet by 400 feet, right, the dimensions read 400 feet by 400 feet. Okay, simple enough. Dimensions are like text and any other type of geometry in AutoCAD, in that you can put them on a layer, they're an object, they print with a line weight, and they can be deleted. Okay. All right, so we have a few different types of dimensions that I will talk about, but the first thing, like I said, I want to talk about defining a dimension style, okay? So defining a dimension style is, visually on the screen here, a lot like creating a text style. So I have a little drop down right here that says standard, and if I drop it down, okay, I see my standard dimension style right there, and it's a gallery view, okay? So it kind of gives me a little preview of what that's going to look like. You see that it's red, so there has been a color / layer assigned to it, right? If I use this little drop down right here, which is somewhat of a new feature, I can specify the dimension that or the layer that I want this to appear on. So just for fun, let's change it to door, and oh, nope, that didn't change. We're not going to use current. Let's change it to dimensions right there. Okay, so we'll leave that like that. So we have, now this is where our dimension style show. This is the layer that they're going to be created on. I have a bunch of other little tools in here, right? Adjust space, we have break, we have inspect, update, a lot of different things. We have right here some functionality of dimensions. We have quick dimension right here. And then we have all of our different dimension types right here. So linear, aligned, angular, arc length, radius, diameter, jogged, and ordinate, which I'm not going to talk about these last two, but I will talk about these first 6. Okay? Dimensions are kind of one of the, I think, the most fun things in AutoCAD, because once you actually get them defined, which is the hard part, they're super easy to use, and they have a lot of integrity, which is really nice. Okay, so to define my dimension style, look familiar, I click on this little flyout right here, and I'm immediately brought into my dimension style manager. All right, so this is the box before the actual definition of my dimension style. All right, although this is where I will create a brand new style, and then I'm brought into the actual definition box in the next step. Okay, so I'm going to click on new right here to create a new dimension style. And we will call this annotative dim style. Okay. I'm not going to start with this style. I'm going to leave this blank right here because I don't have another annotative dimension style to copy. So if I had already created one annotative dimension style and then I wanted to create a second one, maybe with a different text or something, definition in it, I could say, well, I already created one and it works great, so let's start with that one and then I'll alter it from there. But we don't have that here, okay? So I'm going to check annotative. That's a pretty important step. If I leave that out, these dimensions, the annotative functionality won't work, okay? So annotative dimension style, leave this kind of blank for now. Yeah, blank for now. Check annotative and hit continue. Okay. Now by doing that, I am now brought into where I'm going to define my dimension style, okay? And you'll see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different tabs that we have to define. And except for this last one, yes, you will be going through all of these and checking settings, okay? And if something isn't defined correctly, it will just sort of immediately show itself. Right? So, something won't work in your dimension. So there's a lot of settings. You have to set them right. And I mean, that's really how dimensions work, essentially. Let me remind you again that in the course manual here, we have kind of this step-by-step graphic instruction on how to get these things set up correctly. Okay, so you can go through here and you can look and you can see what all of these different settings are. Okay, so if something isn't working, go back to your booklet and take a look and see what you need to change. Okay, dimensions are also kind of difficult because if you change something from its original setting and then you hit OK, you can't really go back into that dimension style and see what was there by default, right? I'll do that a lot. I will maybe create something and then I'll change a setting, and if the setting doesn't work, I'll reset it and it will go back to its original settings for me to look at and see what I've done wrong, right? Dimensions don't do that. So once I change the original setting here on my dimension style editor here, they don't go back to default. And so, you know, I guess my point with that is just make sure that you're being pretty aware of boxes that you're checking and things that you're changing, okay? All right, so first step, we created our style. It's called the annotative dimension style. I have defined it to be annotative, which will make sense on Wednesday, okay? Now we're just really going to go through all of the settings that I think are pertinent for you to know, and we're just going to talk about them, okay? So really, the first set of settings that we're going to worry about are going to be under this tab called Line. So if I click on each of these tabs up here, we change to that tab. So I'm going to click on Lines right there, okay? And the first thing that we see is it says color right there, okay? So color will allow you to manually say, hey, I want the lines on my dimensions to be a specific color, but my default pick is always by layer. So that means that if I put a dimension on a layer, it will change to the color of that layer, and if I change it to a different layer with a different color, the dimension will change, of course, okay? If I change this to something like yellow, it's almost overriding it. It's forcing it to be that color regardless of what layer it's on, okay? So that'll be something that you'll sort of work out. But otherwise, I would just say by layer is always a really safe choice for anything in AutoCAD, okay? Line type, line weight. These line types and line weights are going to be for this category, which is called dimension line, which is different from extension line, okay? So the dimension line, the baseline is this line right here, okay? See if I can get this a little bit bigger. There we go. This line right here is the dimension line or the baseline, okay? These lines that are kind of vertical right here, those are called the extension lines. And this little piece right here is called the architectural tick. So we have our dimension number, we have our dimension line right here, okay? And this vertical is the extension line. So the things that I define right here have to do with this right here, and the things that I define down here have to do with these vertical lines, okay? So I'm going to just choose by layer here, line type and line weight. I think I'm going to change these also to by layer, okay? By block would be fine as well. We'll talk about blocks next week, so that'll make a little more sense. But if I choose by layer and for whatever reason I want to change the line type of my dimensions, I don't have to go back to the style to change it. I can even just change it in the dimensions or the layers, okay? So I like to have this by layer. The extend beyond ticks. So if let's say I want to change this, watch what happens. What's nice about the dimension dialog box here is that if I make a change, it immediately updates what's happening or shows me a preview aesthetically of what my dimension will look like. So if I make that bigger, you see those the extension beyond those lines get bigger. We don't like that. Do, 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 do. Oh. Extend beyond ticks. Let me take a look real quick. Hold on one second. Okay, so the question I had was their extend beyond ticks was locked out, and it was because instead of having a tick there, like a little slash mark, there was an arrow. And so if there's an arrow, this thing is grayed out because the arrow doesn't extend beyond this line here. Okay, so there we go, architectural tick, back to lines. Okay, so you can make that larger, you can make it smaller. Really, this is kind of about aesthetics. I like these to be sort of minimal. It's my personal preference. Our baseline spacing, right? This is going to be, well, let's leave this alone for now. This is going to be how far apart my my strings of dimensions are. Okay, so if I have one string here and I have another one above it, this is how far apart those two are. Okay. If I ever needed to suppress a dimension line, meaning to turn one of these off, okay, I could click on this and see it turns different things off. But we're going to leave those on. All right, extension lines, same rules apply up here, down here. So I'm going to change this to by layer. We're just going to, by block would be fine, but I'm going to change this to by layer, because I like to control things with layers in my drawings. It's kind of a personal preference. By layer. And again, if I wanted to suppress one of those lines, you see I could do that. There we go. I'm going to leave these alone. Again, these are just things, visual changes. If I make them larger, smaller, you know, it changes the aesthetic of it. But, you know, I think that everything else, for now, this looks pretty good. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go now to symbols and arrows. That's my next tab right here. I'm going to click on that. And we can change how our little dimension separators, these architectural ticks, which indicate where a dimension starts and where it stops, we can change what those look like. So the architectural tick is going to be somewhat heavy, and the oblique, if I change it, see it's ever so slightly thinner. So whatever you want it to be. For leaders, a closed filled arrow is fine. The arrow size for our leader, we can change that if we want to. A lot of these are aesthetic items here. Okay, so I'm just going to leave these things that just change the way they look alone for now. Okay, you can play with them if you want to. Center marks. This is for a circle. So if we have a circle like this and we are dimensioning it, if I choose none, you see the little plus sign on the center goes away. If I click on mark, it shows, and if I choose line, it changes to that. Okay. Dimension break. This is break is if we have to create a break in the dimension, which we'll talk about later. So we're going to leave that alone. Let's see here. Okay. We're going to leave these things alone as well. All of these aesthetic settings, they work just fine, right? So there's no need for me to really change any of these things right here. So I've changed, you know, my little architectural ticks to oblique. You can leave them as ticks if you want. But other than that, I think all of these things look just fine to me. All right, I'm going to go to text, and this is where it becomes important that you created a text style, okay, an annotative text style. So right now, what text do I want assigned to my dimension? So what do I want this to look like right here? Currently it says standard, and I'm going to change that by clicking on it and choosing City Blueprint. Okay. Now that went kind of crazy. It doesn't look quite right, but that's okay. All right. And this is the only time where that really would be okay, because it's an annotative text style. So the size of the text on your dimension will flex to be larger or smaller when we learn how to do annotative text and dimensions. Okay, so this is okay for now. If you had forgotten to create your annotative text style before you started into your dimension style, you could create a new one by clicking on this little ellipsis right here. Click. This text style editor pops up here, and I could also create another one if I wanted to. So I could click on new, and maybe we'll do Arial. Okay, and it's annotative, and we'll change this to Arial. There we go. Regular, annotative, yes. 3/32 of an inch, yes. Let's just for fun, 0.8 width factor, apply, close. And now I have another style that I could use. So if I wanted to, I could use Arial. We'll just use City Blueprint for now. Okay. Text color by layer, my favorite. The fill color, we're going to have none on that. The text height, you see it's set at 3/32 here, and it's grayed out, and that's correct because the text height is embedded into the text style, right? If you remember, City Blueprint, I've defined this to be annotative, and the text paper height size is 3/32 right there. Okay. So that's going to be grayed out, and that's correct. Our fraction height scale, we're going to leave this alone right here, okay? This text placement, we want it above the line right here. We want it centered, and we want to read it left to right. So those all look really good, okay? And aligned with dimension line, that's how we want it, okay? So these are the settings that I prefer for your text, okay? Once you start using AutoCAD a little bit more and you kind of figure out how you like things, you're free to edit this and make it, kind of style or brand it towards whatever you're doing, but these are some good kind of basic settings for you. All right, we're going to talk about fit next. All right, and if there isn't enough room to place both text and arrow inside extension lines, the first thing to move outside the lines is we're going to click on text. Okay, so basically a lot of times you see how a dimension fits above a dimension line and it's right in between these two extension lines. Every now and again there's you can type in text with your dimension and maybe it extends in a line much longer than both of these dimension lines here. So if that happens, that's what this setting is asking. Hey, what would you like me to do if your dimension or text doesn't fit? Well, we'll move the text first. We want our text placement to be over the dimension line with the leader. We want this to be annotative. So everything here looks pretty good. Okay, so that's fit. The next, we're going to go over to primary units next. So this is somewhat in the same realm as drawing units. Okay, so how are we going to be measuring things in your drawing? Our drawing, of course, down here is architectural, and for those of you who are going to be architects, you will be working in architectural units, okay? Those of you who are going to be engineers or other professions, you may be using decimal inches or other measurements to create things, okay? So I think maybe some good advice, I'm hoping this is good advice, is that whatever your drawing unit is, your dimension unit should be as well, right? Because if this is architectural, then we want our dimensions to read architectural units. If this is decimal, then we will change this to decimal. Okay, makes sense. So we'll make sure this is architectural. Our precision here, and this precision is for dimensions, meaning how do we want our dimensions to read, / do we want them to round off, and if we want them to round off, to what increment do we want them to round off to? Okay. Very rarely on like a floor plan will you see an 1/8 of an inch dimension because, a carpenter or a drywaller, they're not going to get, I mean, they'll be very, very close, of course, but an 1/8 of an inch is a pretty tall order for that kind of thing, right? It needs to be 25 feet and 1/8 of an inch, and I'm going to measure it, right? Not very realistic, of course. I think that a more realistic dimension or precision here would be 1/4 of an inch. And probably even more realistic than that would be 1/2 inch or to the whole inch, but we'll just put it at 1/4 of an inch. So this is what your dimension, this will be the lowest increment that your dimension will read to, okay? Fraction format, horizontal or vertical or diagonal or not stacked. These are going to be a little hard to see with our annotative preview, but I think horizontal is just fine, okay? This is vertical right here. For our round off, we're going to leave that to 0. We don't want to round off our dimensions, really, because when things get rounded, they can very easily add up to large numbers at the very end of a dimension string of buildings being off dimension, okay? Prefix, suffix, we're going to leave that alone for now. This will remain 1. We are going to check 0 feet right here, so 0 suppression. If a dimension is like 2 inches and 3/4 of an inch, this means that if we don't suppress the 0 for feet, it will say 0 foot dash 2 3/4 of an inch. And it's just kind of a space saver really to check this. So our 0 doesn't show. Our units are decimal degrees. Our precision here will be 0. And that's really all we need to do with primary units here, okay? Alternate units, I'm really not going to worry about this here. This is in case we need to add another unit to our dimension. So for now, I would say that this would be the case where if, I have feet in inches, but also I want to show decimals, right? Very rarely the case. I guess you could do that. Although I think that likely a separate drawing with a separate set of dimensions is probably a better idea for clarity, right? Although I say that, and maybe somebody who does shop drawings for like a stone company or for some product manufacturer, maybe they sell internationally, and so it makes sense to show decimals and feet and inches on a dimension. But for our purposes, we're not going to worry about that, but this would be where you could indicate those things, okay? Have dual units. Tolerances, we're not going to worry about either, okay? So alternate units and tolerances, we're just going to leave alone for now, okay? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different tabs that we have to define our settings, and I'm just going to put each of these tabs up on the screen so that if you're watching the video, you can stop here and copy the settings, okay? And symbols and arrows, there we go, that's what it looks like. Text, that's what it looks like, okay? Fit, that's what it looks like. Primary units, looks wonderful. And then alternate units and tolerances we'll leave alone, okay? So now that I'm done defining my dimension style, I hit OK. And it says, setting another style current will discard your style override. So I'm going to hit OK. And now I have a new style called annotative dimension style. I'm going to click on it just like I would a text style. I'm going to choose set current. I'm going to hit close. And now my annotative dimension style is set current. Okay. I can use the drop down arrow and I can see the different styles that I currently have. Okay. All right, let's say that I wanted to create a second dimension style, or that I needed to alter one that I had already created, right? Maybe there was a mistake that happened and I needed to alter it, okay? I could click on this little flyout again. I could click on the dimension style. Let's say we're altering this. I could click on it and I could choose modify. And I could come in here, make any changes I needed to make, hit OK, close, and the changes would be saved. Easy enough. If I wanted to create a new dimension style, I could click on my little flyout, click on the dimension style I want to copy, click on new, and it says copy of annotative dimension style. Yeah, I want to start with that one because I defined it. It has all the correct settings. I just want to alter a few things about it. So I'm going to give it a name, dimension style, maybe underscore Arial text. Yes, yes, continue. And then I would come in here and make the changes I needed to make, right? So I could go over to text. Instead of city blueprint, change this to Arial. Hit OK. Close. And now I have two dimension styles. One that is just the annotative dim style, and the second one that is with the Arial text. Okay. All right. So that is how we're going to define our dimension styles. Maybe I worked it up a little bit too much, right? Not terrible. But now let's talk about applying these to something, okay? And I think, I don't know, do you guys have access to the CAD Common today? Since CAD Common is not down and you guys probably don't have a ton of files with you, I'm going to just show you how to apply dimensions here, and then on Wednesday, hopefully it'll be back up again and we'll be able to get a good floor plan to deal with, or to work with. But let's talk about how we now apply dimensions, okay? Probably one of the easiest things that you will learn how to do in AutoCAD. Applying dimensions is really easy, but how people like them is the worst thing in the world, right? Everybody likes things dimensioned differently, even though there really is a standard to applying dimensions. It's just so funny. This is one of those things where, you do it kind of the textbook way, and depends on who you're working with at the time, but everybody likes these different. So, but there are kind of textbook ways to get things dimensioned. So we'll talk about those probably on Wednesday a little bit more. But let's talk about the different types of dimensions that we have here. And I want to just kind of reiterate, in the course manual, There are illustrations, right, on how the dimensions work, okay, and this is the actual file I was looking for, and showing you how to use the methods behind creating dimensions, okay? All right, so we have 6 different types of dimensions we're going to talk about, and the first one we have is linear, and I think we get a little, yes, there we go. So a linear dimension will create a straight dimension. Regardless of whether or not the object is angled, we will get a straight dimension from a linear dimension, okay? It won't angle, it won't stray from the orthogonal direction. It always will be a straight dimension, okay? Aligned will allow you to create a dimension that is aligned to the orientation of the object you're dimensioning. So if it's diagonal, then the dimension appears diagonal, right? Makes sense. We have angular, which will dimension angles, easy. Arc length, this will dimension arcs. Radius will dimension a radius. And diameter will dimension a diameter, okay? Really easy. So there's 2 ways that we can initiate a dimension command. So I can come up here, and if I just click on this little dimension, right, this will create multiple types of dimensions within a single command session. So meaning I can click on dimension here, and it will sort of sense the way I want to dimension things, and it can change, okay? I clicked on dimension. I got a little ahead of myself right there. And it says, hey, select an annotation scale. Of course, we got this. I'm just going to hit OK for now, leaving this at 1:1. Okay. I can also kind of force what kind of dimension style I want to use to dimension, and pick the method I like the best. Okay. So usually I don't stray from linear or aligned very often. And in fact, I usually stick with aligned more so than any, because linear will give you a good dimension, but it won't give you the accurate dimension a lot of times of an object, right? And what I mean by that is, if I draw a line that's diagonal right there, and I use the linear dimension to dimension this, I don't get the actual, see how it goes straight down? And it says 16'4" right there, right? We'll fix the size of that in a minute. This line is actually not 16'4", right? The length from here to here is 16'4", but the length of this diagonal line is not 16'4", okay? So I tend not to use the linear dimension a whole lot, just for that reason. I tend to use the aligned dimension, okay? I'm going to click on aligned. My dimension style is chosen. My layer that I want my dimensions to be on is correct. And the way that I'm going to use these dimensions is just click and pull. It's so easy, okay? I can click on one endpoint, I can click on a second endpoint, move in the direction I want to go, click a third time, and I've just created a dimension. Okay, enter, and it reinitiates the dimension command. Click, click, pull, but now I don't just click in space here. I can come over to the dimension next to me, and you see my nearest snap engages, and I click, and it aligns those two. Okay. Enter, click, click, pull it up, click on the one next to it, click, and it aligns those so they're the same size, okay? Now, you're looking at this and you're thinking, it doesn't look right. Those don't look like the dimensions that we created, and they don't. And the reason that the text is very small, and the reason that our, kind of architectural ticks don't look right, that is because of how our annotative setting is set within our model space. Okay. Now I'm going to click on this little lightning bolt right there, and I'm going to turn it on, that annotative lightning bolt. You guys see that? And I'm going to change this from 1 to 1. I'm going to click on this, and I'm going to change it to 1/4 of an inch is equal to a foot. Holy cow, they pop up. Isn't that amazing? Okay. Or I'm going to change it to 1/8 of an inch is equal to a foot. Click. Wow, the text even got bigger. Okay. I can't even tell you what a pain in the neck doing that used to cause in AutoCAD. And now it's just so simple. The numbers change and they're wonderful, right? All right. So why are those numbers changing? Number one, how do we set our annotative settings? We'll talk about annotative settings a little more on Wednesday. The reason that the numbers are changing size is because at different scales, text needs to be a different physical height in model space so that when you scale it, it prints at the right size on the piece of paper. Okay? That was an idea that took me a really long time to understand. So I don't expect you to totally understand it right now, okay? I am going to show you an illustration of what I mean though, okay? I'm going to come over here to Paperspace. Paperspace is where we print. And we talked about last time, when we print things, we want our text to be the same size on the page, right? I showed you a detail page and I said, you know, regardless of what scale we print these details at, I want the text to be the same size. Okay. So let me MV, I'm going to create another viewport here. Looks lovely. Okay. I'm going to click on this viewport and I'm going to change the scale of this one to 1/8 of an inch. And the whole drawing doesn't fit that well. And when I change this one to 1/4, it's not going to fit very well either, but that doesn't matter to me right now. I just want to show you, I'm going to show you something. I want to show you that right now at 1/8 of an inch, do you see how nice and lovely that text looks, right? Okay. Oop. At 1/8 of an inch scale, this viewport is scaled to 1/8 of an inch. This looks wonderful. I'm going to double click here. I'm going to zoom into this, double click out, select. I'm going to change this to 1/4 of an inch. Okay. And now at 1/4 of an inch, that looks lovely as well, okay? So right now, these two, do you see how, I'm going to move this over here real quick. Do you see how if I put them right next to each other, the text is the same height, right? Okay. I'm going to do something that doesn't make sense to you right now. Let's change this to 1/64. Okay. I'm going to change the scale of this drawing right here to, hopefully I can, here we go. Okay. Hold on one second. I'm trying to illustrate a mistake. Okay. Do you see how I change this from, when I select this dimension, I have two different text sizes right here, okay? One of these, sorry, I don't think I did the right thing here. Let me undo this real quick. I don't want this at 1/64. There we go, that's what we want. Okay, I have two different text sizes here. I have one that is very small and I have one that is larger, okay? And the reason behind that is that when I scale a viewport at 1/4 of an inch is equal to a foot, which is this one, AutoCAD zooms in a scale factor of 48 times to make that scale happen. Okay, and when I scale something at 1/8 of an inch is equal to a foot, AutoCAD zooms in at a scale factor of 96 times, right? It zooms in twice the amount for 1/8 of an inch as opposed to 1/4 of an inch. Okay, so what that means is that my text for 1/8 of an inch has to be twice as tall as my text for 1/4 of an inch in order for it to look the same size on this piece of paper when it's printed. Okay, 1/8 inch, 1/4 inch, same size, which is what we love. But because AutoCAD zooms in differently to create those scales through the viewport, the text in model space has to be a different physical size in order for that sameness in Paperspace to happen. Now I'm telling you about this just so that you understand why text can appear smaller in model space, it can appear larger. When I select a dimension, I see two different text heights associated with this dimension, right? Not to say that it will print double like this, okay? But that's the reason why. We'll say in the dark ages of AutoCAD, back in the dark ages of AutoCAD, when you created a dimension style, you had to create about 10 of them before annotative text, because we had 1/8 inch, 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, 1:1. We had a bunch of different very common scales that we used, and AutoCAD didn't use to sort of flex the text for us. We had to do it manually. So this ability for AutoCAD, the annotative ability to flex our text to make it smaller and larger depending on the scale we scale it at. That's kind of what annotative text is all about. Okay, annotative text is AutoCAD's ability to make our text larger and smaller to accommodate different scales in paper space. Okay. Okay. So when I select this, I get a couple of different sizes. When I select this, I get a couple of different sizes. They won't print, okay, but they will flex to allow text to be the right size. Okay. Are there any questions on that so far? It's a confusing topic, but it works and it saves you time. And when we meet on Wednesday, I'm really going to talk about dimension methodology and really how to set your annotative scale and how to get it working in your viewports. Okay, so we'll talk about that on Wednesday. But for today, I'm gonna finish showing you how to use dimensions. Okay, so I got my text the right size. It looks wonderful. And we can see it over here in our viewport. So if your text is not reading, click on this little lightning bolt, okay? And just change this to something like 1/4 of an inch or 1/8 inch, just to play around to see what's going on, okay? Now, I just created, I'm gonna click on this down here. I created an aligned dimension. Click, okay? I can click on the beginning of an object. I could click here on the midpoint if I wanted. The midpoint of that window, click. Move in the direction I want to go. I could just click if I needed to, or I could type in something like 24 inches, enter, and it creates that dimension 24 inches from the wall here. Okay. I could hit enter and I restart my dimension command. Click, move down here in the direction I want to go. Click on this wall in here. You notice my line is diagonal. Click. Click again and I get a diagonal dimension. That's the functionality of aligned, okay, is that if I click a diagonal line, I get a diagonal dimension. Delete. I could click here on linear, click, not straight line, click, come over here to the dimension by it, click again, and those line up, okay? So I could hit enter and I could continue on with this dimension string, but I could also come up here to my dimension tool palette, and you see we have a continue option right here, okay? I can click on dimension continue, and AutoCAD just picks up and lets me continue. It just makes this a continuous command, okay? Now I can click on endpoints, I can snap. I can also just click on random points in space. You see me click, 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 click at the end, hit escape to exit. Okay, looks great. This is what's called a leader. So a leader occurs when this text is too big to fit between our extension lines here. Okay, so you'll see that happening. It's not beautiful in AutoCAD. They haven't quite figured this whole thing out, but that's what that leader is. Okay. If I now want to create another set of dimensions, we'll say above these three right here, 1, 2, 3. It's called a baseline, okay? And I can click under continue, we have baseline. And now baseline starts to connect with the last dimension I created, but I don't want to create a baseline over there. So I'm going to hit enter to select where I want that baseline to occur. I'm going to click on this dimension. Oop. Click over here on the end. Sorry, I should have clicked on the end there. Now you notice when I move my mouse down, the baseline occurs above. When I move it up, it occurs below. I come over here, I click, I hit escape, and now I have two dimensions, one right above the other. Okay, I could click on baseline again, hit enter, click where I want to start, and I have another. Okay. So this baseline spacing, what's really nice about using the baseline option, you don't have to. I could click on linear, I could click here, I could click all the way down here, pull this out, right, so it's above where I want it to go, click again. I could create my dimension like that, but the nice thing about this baseline is that it very equally spaces my baselines, right? So they're very nice and they're equally spaced, which we all love. Our drawings look wonderful, right? But it is a pain in the neck unless you change your keyboard shortcut to come all the way back up here, click a down arrow, click on baseline, right? And it's actually what I like the command, but what I don't like about it is it's quite sticky, right? The second I click to finish, it starts a new one. Click, click, right? It just continues to start a new one, okay? Okay. So, you know, these dimensions are very easy to use. If I click on radius, so aligned and linear, we know. Angular, click. I click on 1, I click on 2, and an angle appears. Click, there's my angle. If I click on, I'm not going to do arc length. Well, we'll do arc length in a minute. I'm going to click on radius here, click. I click on a radius, click again, there's my radius. Okay. And we have our diameter. I don't have a circle in here. Yes, I do. There we go. Click on that. There's my diameter. Click again, and the diameter is 11 inches. Okay, so there's our lovely dimension. I can click on a dimension, and you see that it has grips. So I could click on this and drag it down, click again, put it where it needs to go. Okay, same thing with any of these dimensions. I can click on a dimension, click on a grip, drag it where it needs to go, and it works. The really great thing about dimensions is that I feel like a good way to describe them is that they have a lot of integrity, meaning they stretch as a whole, right? If I had tried to stretch something with a grip, like a line, and I just picked one end, only one end of it would go with it, right? I wouldn't get the entire dimension moving like I do here, okay? So I can click on a grip, I can move it out, I can click again, and it places itself. I can also move the text, okay? I can click on the text with the grip, click. I can move it over, click, and put it in a different spot. And you ask, well, why would I need to do that? Well, every now and again, something interferes with the dimension, and you need to move it over. You'll run into those, okay? And probably one of the best things about AutoCAD that I miss, because Revit doesn't allow you to do this, is we have what we call the fudge factor, where I can edit this dimension number here, and I can change it, right? It doesn't make sense, right? But every now and again you could say, oh, you know, it says 38 foot 8 inches, but it really has to be, to meet code, it has to be 38 foot 7 inches, whatever, right? And so click, click, and I can change it if I need to. Very cheaty, right? But I just use I click on it, it's editable now like text. I use the arrows to go to the very end. I click the over arrow and then I can backspace. I could type in, I don't remember what that dimension was. Shoot, 38 foot 9 inches. Enter. Click out of it, or you can click on the close and you can change this. I can also double click and I could hit enter or equal. I should have done that. There we go. Close the text editor, right? So if you needed to add commentary to some of your text or to some of your dimensions, you can double click on them, you can edit them, okay? All right, any questions so far? All right. So, so we know how to create a new text style. We know that we have to have a dimension style. We know that we have to have a text style to sort of embed into that dimension style, right? We know how to use our linear, aligned, angular. I'm going to wait on this one. I want to find a good example for this one. Radius and diameter. We know how to use all of those. I want to show you one other way to create dimensions, which is actually very, we'll say precise, okay? If I click on, I'm going to choose aligned, okay? I have the ability to click once, click a second time, and apply a dimension. But if you notice down here, it says specify the first extension line origin or select an object. So if I hit enter right here, enter, I am also allowed to select an object, click, and a dimension appears, click, and I get the entire object. I don't accidentally maybe miss the endpoint by a ½ inch or an inch, right? So this is actually a really nice option right here. Click on aligned, I hit enter, click on an object, click, pull it up, click again, Okay, if I needed to, I can come up here and click on dim continue, and I could go across and click on the stair, go across and click on the wall there, right? I could come down here and click where the door is, I'm just dimensioning everything, click, escape, and I have dimensions across. Here's, ooh, it almost was, I was gonna say there's a good example of text being obscured by something, but it just barely missed it. That never happens when you're actually like working on something, right? The text always appears like through the wall or something like that, right? That would be a good instance where you would grab it and kind of move it to where it's readable, okay? Okay. Any questions so far? Okay, let me just make sure that I didn't miss anything here. Okay. So I'm going to talk about one more thing today, and then on Wednesday we'll talk about dimension philosophy, right? How do we actually dimension things? What gets dimensioned first, second, and third? We're going to talk about leaders, leader style, how to use leaders, and then on Wednesday we'll really get into how to set your annotative workspace, okay? We'll make things work in model space and also work in paper space, okay? But the final thing I just wanted to say with regard to dimensions before we actually talk about how to place them, really like the philosophy behind it, is that neatness is paramount in adding dimensions. Okay, so whether you have a ton of dimensions, very few dimensions, whatever scale you're working at, you want to make sure your dimensions are neat. And what I mean by that is if I click on a dimension here, right, you see how nice and straight this line of dimension goes? Unless there were a very specific reason why, you want your dimensions to be very continuous. You want them to go in a straight line. Sorry, I moved that over. Do you see that? If I miss the target point, I can come down here and grab this bottom grip, click, and I can move it to where it needs to go. Sorry, I forgot about talking about that. Okay. I can continue, or I can click on aligned again, but what if I did one down here? And what if I did one kind of up here and over to there, right? And so instead of my nice long string of dimensions that makes sense and allow somebody who is looking at the set of drawings to graphically read these like they would a book, right? Up here, down here, up here, it's so messy, it gives me a headache, right? It's just terrible. So make sure that your dimensions are very neat, that wherever possible you get long, nice, continuous lines of dimensions, okay? Sorry, I said that was my final thing, but I actually have one more final thing I want to talk about with dimensions. This is just quick. I'm going to dimension in space here, okay? So I do have my dimension, looks wonderful. I have my text, I can click on it, I can move my text. We talked about that, okay? This little point down here, if anybody was curious, number one, if I select my dimension, I can click on that, drag this to wherever it needs to go, and that will change the dimension, okay? Dimensions always update, so if I move one endpoint, it changes, which is great, right? I could change it like that if I needed to. Let's go, Kevin. Okay, so I can change it, I can make it angular, I can do whatever I need to do. All right, so this little point right here, if anybody was very curious about some AutoCAD fun, we'll say bits of information, you can see that little dot right there, okay? That little dot looks a lot like a defined point, and it is, but in actuality, that little dot right there, that dot is on the def points layer. It's built into the whole dimension structure, we'll say the dimension structure, that point is the def points layer right there, okay? So when I taught you about layers and I said, hey, we have these layers and layer zeros for blocks, you create layers for different things, don't draw on def points, right? Because it doesn't print and it's used for something else in AutoCAD. Dimensions is actually what def points is used for, okay? So def points is defined, it's locked, and it is never defined to print, and you can't change that. And really, that little point that creates that extension to the object on your dimension, that's what def points is for, okay? So from here to there, so that we can place things and visually see what's going on, that's what the def points layer is used for, Okay, not to say the dimensions are on the def points layer, but just that little piece of them, that's what it's there for. Okay. All right, our messy dimension lecture. Any questions? Okay.